Welcome back, everybody. Another edition here of the Auburn Undercover podcast on the 24/7 Sports Network. My name is Nathan King. Auburn is now heading into its bye week after its second straight top 10 road game, and not an overly not an overly surprising result for Auburn to go on the road and lose to Ole Miss. Final score 48-34. Obviously, that snaps a 6-game winning streak for Auburn in this series. Now their longest winning streak in the SEC is their next opponent, Arkansas, whom they'll face in Jordan-Hare Stadium after this bye week. But, it was surprising that Auburn was able to play this well offensively. This has been a team that struggled so much in run blocking this season. And in this game, they were able to run for 301 yards. Tank Bigsby, and second most rushing yards in a game of his career. Is the most rushing yards for Auburn in a game since the 2017 season when they went to the SEC title game. But as I'm joined here by Jason Caldwell, Jason, it was that, it was the run defense that really did them in, and it's the second straight game they've really struggled in that department. We were talking about before we started, they're now way down in the bottom of almost every single run defense statistical category you look at. And the thing about this game was we've seen in the past, and even it was a pretty good example of it last week against Georgia. We've seen this in the past of Auburn goes on the road against a good team. They can't do much offensively, so the defense just, goes out and out and out and out and just, is heading back there to defend so often. By the time the second half starts, Auburn's just scoring 7 points, 10 points in the entire game. That defense is going to get worn down. Ultimately, the other team is just going to dictate the game with the run. After the first quarter, where Auburn kind of got its act together after that and stopped turning the ball over and started sustain, it was long drives. We're talking long 75-yard touchdown drives, running the ball, running clock, playing really well offensively, scoring 34 points in this game. You can't really use that excuse in this game. It was a masterful performance by Ole Miss on offense in terms of running the ball, but for Auburn, it just a devastating defensive performance. And as we were talking about after the game, one of the worst run defense performances for this team in its entire history.
Yeah, you look at it, Auburn's offense last year had its share of issues, things that it dealt with. The defense had to stay on the field, do those things. They allowed 8 rushing touchdowns for the season last year. They've allowed 7 the last 2 weeks when you look at this rushing defense and what they've done. And the numbers are pretty staggering when you look at it. I never in my lifetime thought I would see an Auburn defense that's giving up over 200 yards a game on the ground. They're giving up 204.43 yards per game on the ground this season. Auburn has allowed 1,400 rushing yards in 7 games, only a couple of hundred yards less than they allowed the entire season last year in 13 games. It's really crazy to see. That lack of depth is showing up. Just over 7-game stretch. I think those 2 road games have added to that toll that the first 7 games have taken on this team defensively. Obviously, the opposition has gotten much better. When you look at Georgia and Ole Miss, that's 2 of the better running teams in the country. The only problem for Auburn is after a bye week, you have another one of those teams in Arkansas, a team that can run the football and is physical. But that was really the story of Saturday's game. Yes, there were improvements on offense. Yes, Auburn was able to run the football. But yes, they still lost by 2 touchdowns to Ole Miss. In the end, that's what you look at. And, Auburn, to their credit, they played hard. They kept coming. They were down 21-0. And like most people, I thought it was getting ready to be a really ugly, in Oxford. But it wasn't. And so they battled. Had a couple of turnovers, and that continues to be an issue for this team. They did get one big one to be able to get some points on the board, which was important. But, the story is that, and I talked about it last week, how it reminds me a little bit of 2008, where the defense just kind of getting worn out, and it starts to show up. Saw that again on Saturday. And, hey, Ole Miss is a really good offensive football team and as a running team. They're not very good throwing the football. Jackson Dart's a good runner. I didn't think he was very good throwing the football. But that's a bad defensive team. I mean, Ole Miss was terrible defensively. Auburn took advantage of it. And as I thought about this morning, if Auburn doesn't attempt a pass in that game Saturday, they may win. They might win that game if they never throw the ball. And so that was a situation where you look at it and you go, they talked about it, they established the run Saturday. They were running it early. Matter of fact, the first interception came after a couple of very good runs, and they tried to throw a screen pass too high. The ball's tipped in there and intercepted, and Ole Miss goes in and scores. I'm not certain that Ole Miss ever stops Auburn if Auburn runs the football all day long. They didn't. They ran it a bunch. But in the end, the story was defense and the lack of defense. And it's really, it was both sides against Georgia. It was everything defensively against Ole Miss on Saturday.
Yeah, that you have to think, like you were talking about, if they don't put the ball in the air as much. Obviously, those turnovers there in the first quarter, you had the throw and the screen pass to Bigsby that was too high, ended up in the arms of the Ole Miss defensive back. Then Ole Miss went up, I believe they went up 14-0 after that one, and then they sub in TJ Finley at quarterback because Robbie Ashford was just looking kind of erratic, and it's his first time we've seen TJ Finley since the Penn State game in week 3. He didn't travel last week. It was pretty clear that he would be available for this one based on the way he was warming up. And that series went about as expected. There was a free rusher coming right at him, and as has been the case with Auburn's quarterbacks all year long, which by the way, they're up to 12 combined fumbles now in the season. Auburn's quarterbacks are. He was strip sacked after a brief review. They give it to Ole Miss, and at the beginning of the second quarter, it's 21-0. That sequence, obviously, there were a couple different things. We'll talk about the onside kick as well, but that disastrous start for Auburn was really what did them in, because over the course of the rest of the game, like you mentioned, they could not stop this rushing attack. You had the best game for Tank Bigsby since his freshman year when he had 192 at Mississippi State. So he went for 179 yards and 2 touchdowns. Jarquez Hunter had 80 yards on the ground. That's his most against a Power 5 team in his career. So you could call this the best game of Jarquez Hunter's career. He did it on only 10 carries as well. And then we saw Robbie Ashford get into the end zone on a couple of times. He had a keeper, and then he scrambled from 11 yards out another time. But it was that opening few minutes, really not the opening quarter, that I think was obviously the reason why Auburn just got behind the 8 ball for the rest of the game. But I mean, this was a run blocking performance that we just haven't been used to with this team. We were on here a couple weeks ago after LSU and Missouri when they were just dreadful. They were getting pushed back behind the line of scrimmage every single game. I still think Missouri is one of the worst run blocking performances, if not the worst, I've ever seen from this Auburn team. Their ability to bounce back in this game was crazy. And Jason, as you mentioned with Brian Harsin after the game when you got asking about Jeremiah Wright, it was done with another reshuffled offensive line. And just like when they reshuffled it before the LSU game, they actually had some pretty good success with this one.
They did. I thought Jeremiah Wright did a good job. Now, obviously, we're not grading film. We're not doing those things. But, and I mentioned it when I spoke to Brian Harsin, being on the field, I got a little bit different take. And I saw a guy who was really excited about getting ready to play. I mean, Jeremiah Wright was, patting himself on the helmet. Saw it after touchdowns. One of those plays where they're on the goal line down there, he's screaming at the Ole Miss students and kind of, hit himself in the head. I mean, like he was fired up about that opportunity. And to me, that's a little something what's missing. He's a guy that it was fresh for him. He was anxious to go out there and try to prove a point that he was ready to go. And he was. I thought he delivered some blows. Hey, he's not perfect in execution, probably not perfect in assignment, but people rarely are. But I tell you what he is. He's a guy that's really strong and really physical and can get off on guys and create some running room for guys. And we saw that. We saw guys, have some room, in the middle of the defense. Auburn didn't necessarily have to bounce a lot outside against Ole Miss on Saturday. They were able to run the football, and credit to Tank and Jarquez. Those guys ran through some tackles and got into the second level, made some plays, and did a good job of it. So all in all, from an offensive standpoint, other than the turnovers and the passing game wasn't great, but when you're talking about what this team wants to be, to have 300 yards rushing was pretty crazy. And on that drive, a drive home like that, you have plenty of time to talk about a game. And myself and Mark Murphy were talking about, if Auburn just holds them to 300 yards rushing, Auburn probably wins the football game. And Ole Miss won a football game where they gave up 300 yards rushing. It's crazy, but that was the situation, that was scenario. But from an offensive standpoint, got a little something to build on if you're Auburn, especially with Arkansas coming in, a defense that not a whole lot better than what Auburn's done and what we saw from Ole Miss. It's going to be another chance to go out there and score some points if your defense can just give you a little bit more.
Yeah, I wanted to tell you these and get your reaction to them. Like you said, grading, all that kind of stuff, the film, what have you, probably not as important for a guy like Jeremiah Wright in this game. Like you mentioned, you could see that mean streak from him up in the press box. It was actually Ladarius Tennyson that he planted in the end zone after a touchdown. Just put him on his back in the end zone. This was not overly surprising to me. Worst pass blocking grade, according to this Pro Football Focus, worst pass blocking grade on the team Saturday was Jeremiah Wright. Best run blocking grade on the team was Jeremiah Wright, which is not, and like you mentioned, I think pass blocking, has a little bit more, especially with a guy like Ashford who's going to stay back there a little bit longer, more opportunities for him to miss something or, have something go wrong. Whereas run blocking, just getting out there and just trying to pulverize people. So we'll see, we'll see what that offensive line wants to do. Moving forward, obviously, it was no Austin Troxell at right tackle. It was no Alec Jackson at right guard. They moved Cam Stutz in there at right guard from left to right, and so Jeremiah Wright took the spot at left guard. But Cameron Stutz also left the game, and so we'll see whether they have to do something else different moving forward. A big moment in the game was that onside kick in the third quarter. Ole Miss goes up, and right out of the gates, Auburn scores in 3 plays with Tank Bigsby from 50 yards out. Which was probably Auburn's most impressive run of the season so far to that point. Ole Miss has a nice looking drive, but they're stalled out in the red zone. And Auburn's feeling pretty good about itself. You really could just kind of feel they get that scoring drive. They had a really good, they definitely won the second quarter. Then they go out there, Ole Miss drives down the field, but they get a nice stop. You could kind of, I don't know about momentum swinging Auburn's direction, but it was definitely teetering that way. I mean, that touchdown at drive, that kind of free possession that Ole Miss got, it seemed pretty significant to me, that onside kick. There's not really much you can do in that scenario because of how much of a surprise it was, and that's what Brian Harsin admitted after the game. He's like, look, they flat out got us. Weren't expecting it, and so we didn't execute on it. They went out there and did that. That was just such a big key for me in that second half of the game because Ole Miss then goes up 10 after that, and they were just keeping them at arm's length for the rest of the game because of that. Whereas, like you mentioned, this Auburn team in the second half was having no problem on offense, getting up and down the field. The only time they had problems was on the last drive when they had to put the ball in the air because there was very little time left. When they were able to just play their game and run down the field, they were getting all the way to the other side for either most of the time a touchdown, but sometimes a field goal. So that onside kick to me was maybe the story of the game in terms of an individual sequence. Obviously, Ole Miss running the ball was the big story, but in terms of an individual sequence, that I think that did a lot for Ole Miss to feel more comfortable about itself and kind of shift the pressure back onto Auburn.
Yeah, I mean, you look and they had stalled a little bit out and had to kick a field goal, and you look, Auburn is, you get the ball back, a chance to go score a touchdown and tie the game, and you start going, okay, you got a shot at this one. The pressure's all on Ole Miss, and once they get the ball back, go up 2 touchdowns, then it felt like, okay, that was the shot that right there. And to their credit, to Lane Kiffin's credit, they executed a play in the moment. And honestly, the way Ole Miss defense was playing at that time, it felt like a gamble worth taking. That's one where you go, hey, if you kick the ball off to Auburn, they're probably going to score. If you kick it onside kick and don't get it, they're probably going to score. Okay, it's worth the risk, and they executed it and made it pay off. That one, to me, felt like such a different gamble than the one Auburn took against Georgia because it was almost the opposite. You punt the ball. Georgia didn't feel like they were going to score, but you gave them that opportunity. In this one, I felt like they didn't have anything to lose in this situation because the way their defense was playing, and they stole a possession, made it pay off with a touchdown, and that wound up, I think, being, maybe the difference in the whole football game.
Auburn now heads into the bye week at 3-4. We mentioned this a couple weeks ago, or you did, Jason, about after this game, the last 12 games for Brian Harsin now. And you look at it, and he's 3-9 in his last 12 games. This was Auburn's 6th loss in their last 7. SEC games. This reminded me a little bit. Obviously, it was different because you didn't blow a 17-point lead at home against LSU, which was pretty rough. But it reminded me of that game a little bit in the sense that you have these offensive improvements. You take some strides here and there. The question is, what are you going to do to translate those moving forward? Because, and maybe it's a an incorrect example, but after that LSU game, they just went to Georgia and just had a pretty standard performance where they got beat up on both sides of the ball and lost pretty handily. So I do think this bye week, is if you're looking at Auburn and still trying to say, okay, what does this team need to do to make a bowl game? I think it's still very feasible. I'm not sure. I would think it's going to happen, but it probably means you got to beat Western Kentucky and then you got to beat A&M and Arkansas at home. Yeah, Arkansas looked great offensively against BYU. They hang 52 points, something like that. And KJ Jefferson is going to be a load in both the run game and in the passing game for them to deal with. But would it surprise any of us if they went out there and beat Arkansas or beat Texas A&M? Not at all, because of just what you've seen from these teams in the past few years. And this game, I think, more than any, showed us that as good as Ole Miss is, and they're probably a top 10 team, but it's still Ole Miss and it's still Auburn. Auburn still is always going to have as much or better talent than a team like Ole Miss, than a team like Arkansas. And this was the case of, Ole Miss has done and they have more talent now than they're used to. They keep on improving it. But the scheming, that I think this was a case of a team that, is better coached, I think, from the offensive side of things and was able to scheme up a win. But at the same time, I don't know. I look at this game against Arkansas after the bye week and think it's a pretty decent spot for Auburn. But the question is if they can hone in on some of these offensive improvements. And then on the other side, they've got to get healthy on defense. I don't remember how many guys went down in that game, and who you would probably know better because you were down there. Who's to say some of them weren't just the Lane Kiffin effect, where guys drop sometimes on when they're moving fast on offense. But I mean, it was 7, 8, 9 guys on defense that went down in this game. So the bye week really couldn't come at a better time for them to make sure they get all those guys healthy before they play Arkansas.
Yeah, being on the field, I don't think any of them were those situations where they're like, hey, let's take a break, because it was just a physical football game. That was, you're talking about backing that up behind Georgia and what they ran into. And, kind of, I just think that defense is worn down some, but I thought there were some collisions back there. And whether it was Zion Puckett, I think Keontae Scott dove, and when he did, he hit his leg hit his head on Owen Popo, and they got a little banged up. But then we saw what Derek Hall and Marcus Harris, Colby Wooden, a bunch of those guys, Nehemiah Pritchett. I mean, there was probably 6 or 7 defensive guys that had to go, hey, I can't do it right now. Got to get up. And so this bye week will go good for them. And you're right. Now you get a chance to kind of get a rest, heal up some, and get ready for an Arkansas team that is just dreadful defensively. And so you're right. There's absolutely hope for this Auburn team. When you look at Arkansas and Texas A&M the next 2 weeks, they're very different types of teams. Arkansas can score, and Auburn's going to have to score. I think it's going to be a very similar game to what we saw on Saturday. You look at Arkansas's defense, and look at the numbers they've allowed. They've given up 24, 30, 27, 23, 49, 40, and 35 this season. That's bad. And you look at total offense the last few times they come out, 555 to Alabama, 568 to Mississippi State, and 471 to BYU. A lot of those are passing yards, almost 400 to Mississippi State, and about 350 to BYU. But this is a game that you play at home. If you're Auburn, I think you feel like, hey, go out and build on what you did, and you got a shot here. And I agree. Will it be easy? No, it's not going to be easy for this team, because you still can't turn it over, because the way your defense is playing right now, Arkansas is going to score points when you look at that offense. So, but no, there's a path for this team to go out here and win a few games. But can you build on that, and can that defense find a little something to cling to? And that's the question right now. I just don't know how much is left for these guys, based on what they laid on the line the first 7 weeks.
Wanted to pop up this comment real quick because it has a lot to do with what you wrote about today, Jason. good way to sort of summarize things. Jeff Cheney on our YouTube channel said, I feel like most fans are proud for the fight the players are putting up. Moving forward, the focus from a fan standpoint is what happens with the hires, AD and coach. This is not so far been in any scenario I can remember all season. There hasn't been any quit in this team, and it wouldn't have been difficult to fold down 21-0 with a couple turnovers there, with the way it looked like Ole Miss was just going to move the ball at will, which they pretty much did. But this, I don't think this is at all a team that has quit yet. Not that I think that they will, but it's worth mentioning, like Jeff said, it is just such a cloud hanging over that we have to talk about every single week. And Brian Harsin was asked about it again after this game, whether he was confident he was going to be able to finish out the season. And to his credit, he was kind of like, yeah, I already talked about that. So he didn't even really go into it all. He's like, you asked that same question 2 weeks ago, so I'm not going to do it anymore.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, really, this is, and you talk to the players after the game, and this is something we were talking about on our drive home. This is a team that has a lot of good players who think that they can have a good team, that they think they can go out there and win these games. They are playing like they are a good team and every single drive on both offense and defense. Now they've got issues on both sides of the ball, but that is what makes me think if they can hone in on some of these improvements, I again really think this is a good time for a bye week. Then I do think they can go out there and get a few of these games here at the end of the season. You never know what's going to happen with Mississippi State. They run 4 plays. Their entire offense is, and if you can find a way to shut them down, they're just so inconsistent. So not saying that I think Auburn's going to make a bowl game, but this was as apparent as ever. It was apparent last week against Georgia. It's been apparent all season. But these Auburn players haven't had any quit in them yet, and coming back from 21-0 to make this a ball game up until very late in the fourth quarter was a good example of that.
Yeah, I agree, and I agree with the comment. There's no question right now that the focus is somewhat on the AD, mostly on what's going to happen, with Brian Harsin and a future. And as of right now, Auburn has a football coach, and until that changes, we talk about this season, and it's just we haven't been into the speculation business of going, hey, here's some good guys that could be the head coach. Well, Auburn has a head coach right now, and when the time comes, if the time comes, then hey, we'll jump into that with both feet moving forward. As far as that open AD spot, it feels like we're getting closer to that. It feels like, and hey, a lot of people speculated a bye week would be, a great time if you're going to make a coaching change. It's also a great time if you're going to announce an AD. And so I wouldn't be shocked to see something start to rumble on that pretty quickly here, giving you guy a chance to kind of get in and get his feet wet before a football game. And so we'll see if we get some traction on that. I think, that's kind of a starting point when you start to move forward with whatever happens with Brian Harsin, or if there's a change and they go a new direction. I think now it feels like that AD spot's going to be in place before the first shoe drops. For a while we weren't sure if that would happen or not. Sure feels like that now, and so it's crazy because there's no I've been on the road on the field for now 20 plus years. There's no question that outside of Arkansas trips, which were always the smallest, just because of travel and everything involved there, the Georgia game and the Ole Miss game are the 2 smallest road crowds that I've seen in my years of covering Auburn football outside of those Arkansas trips. Missouri trip that Auburn made was much better because it was different. It was new. There hasn't been smaller crowds than I've seen the last 2 weeks. That's an issue. That's telling. And, it goes back to that point. Right now, people are more concerned with what happens next and not the rest of the season.
Yeah, and maybe this will change some of that. Maybe putting up a competitive performance on the road against the top 10 team like they did. Maybe we'll change some of that. You obviously haven't had to worry about the home crowd one bit. Obviously, it's when you've got to go into more money, more logistics of having fans travel. But I mean, I would expect a great environment, even if it's at 11 a.m. against Arkansas.
I agree.
Tomorrow, yeah, it's gonna be a great game. It's gonna be a great environment because they've had that all season long. They have had a better environment in every single one of their home games than Ole Miss had yesterday. Absolutely. So it's there's no question there, but it continues to feel like the longer this thing goes on, and they're not going to. I don't think they're going to make a change this week. It's in terms of the coach. It's already, we're recording this at times right now 3:33 on Sunday afternoon. Probably already would have happened by now. And I don't know. You just have to think that the rumblings about him, getting an opportunity to finish out the season, and like Jason said, it's to the point where he's Auburn's head coach, and now that's what you have to focus on, is what this team is doing from week in to week out, because like we mentioned, this is not a team down in the dumps, and this is not a team down and out either in terms of having the opportunity to win games. This is not. I don't see this team at this point going 4-8. I don't. I think maybe if 5-7. If 5-7,
I agree. I think so, and you're right, and that's the thing. As of right now, the way they're continuing to fight and compete and do the things they're doing, it's not fair to the guys to kind of throw them out with the bathwater right now either. And so they deserve the work they put in to continue to cover this team, like normal. And so that's what we'll continue to do. And I think that's the way to handle it until something changes. These guys deserve to continue to go talk about the football game, what they're doing, how they're improving. And again, if it starts to head downhill in a hurry, then obviously things will change from every standpoint.
Sure.
But that hasn't happened yet.
Yeah. Yeah. This game, it seemed that way momentarily, but you go out there and you lose 49-7 to Ole Miss, which was never going to happen. But when they're down 21-zip, probably a lot of Auburn fans are thinking, oh, this is going to be it right here.
I promise you, in 2012, that would have been the case.
Yeah.
Because you just, it was just, teams are like, oh, okay, this is kind of done. This team hasn't done that, and they didn't do that on Saturday, and you got to commit them for that.
Yeah, for sure. Well, good discussion here on Sunday. Appreciate everybody for tuning in and listening. We will see what the availability is like this week, and if we get to chat with anybody, whether it's obviously we'll get Brian Harsin, we know for sure, on the teleconference, but we'll see what happens. We'll see if we have an opportunity to talk with players this week, but it is a bye week, and so we'll do some more episodes this week, kind of reviewing where we are with Auburn at this point in the season, sort of some bye week takeaways from what we've seen, because it is pretty much the midway point of the season. They're just past, obviously, 7 games. They're just past halfway through the regular season. So appreciate everybody for listening. Of course, Auburn loses on the road to Ole Miss 48-34. By the way, it's Ole Miss is only the second time in 60 years that they've started 7-0. So you got to think that was a pretty important win for Lane Kiffin and company, but obviously it snaps a 6-game winning streak in the series for Auburn, and they'll look to continue another 6-game winning streak after the bye week against Arkansas. So appreciate everybody tuning in today. If you guys enjoyed it, please go leave us a 5-star review. That's the number one thing that helps us out. The bumper music is by Beats by Mordecai. You guys can follow him on Twitter, SoundCloud, or Instagram. And until the next episode, we will catch you guys later. Everybody enjoy the start to your week.